What up, HyperChange? Welcome to another episode. Today we're going to be talking about Square. Recently put up a post on Patreon asking what you, the supporters, would like to watch on the channel. What should I do an episode about? And Square was by far the most requested. And also, ironically enough, great minds think alike. I've been working on behind the scenes randomly on an episode about Square and why if there's one company stock I could buy that wasn't Tesla on the public markets, it would be Square. Today we're going to talk about the business model, go through all the financials, made a ton of charts documenting each sort of facet of the business model, and then we're gonna get to my valuation and everything. So let's get right into it. So Square was founded by Jack Dorsey about a decade ago, right around the time that smartphones were proliferating. And they started with this very simple product, which was just a Square credit card reader. So you may take it for granted today, but back when, the smartphones were ubiquitous for the first time, everyone had a really powerful computer in their pocket, and Square and Jack Dorsey saw this as an opportunity to where if they could create a little thing that goes right into your headphone jack, a credit card reader, then you could allow anyone to accept payments for their business, anywhere they were, as long as they had their smartphone on them, and they just sort of unlocked commerce on the smartphone. So it started with this very tiny idea, and since then, Square has expanded into all sorts of point of sale systems. You probably see them at your favorite coffee shop, your favorite donut shop, your favorite restaurant, that weird store down the street that sells coats for dogs. Like, they probably all have a Square credit card reader or hardware device. And now the company doesn't just do point of sale and credit card readers. I mean, they've really expanded into digitizing the entire back office of what a small to medium-sized business would need. All services like payments, point of sale, receipts, employees, analytics, finance, invoices, marketing, all of this is now being digitized by Square, and they continue to layer more and more services on top of this payments and financial services, core business model. With the digital economy, there's never been a better time to sort of digitize and consolidate all of these back-end transactions for businesses, and that's really the selling point of Square's integration. The way that they're able to integrate, your payment system, your point of sale, your payroll for employees, your website, your inventory. There's so much that small businesses have to do, and using software to sort of package everything neatly and nicely, starting with the payments ecosystem, which is where all of the data comes from, is a huge selling point for businesses, and that's the value that Square provides. And because their product is so compelling, they've seen tremendous growth and success throughout the past couple years, and I think they're only just getting started at how far this company can go. Before we get in the financials, I did want to highlight that Square checks a box of one of my most important things in investing, which is the company, or does the company have a founder, owner, and operator? Is the person that, founded the company, are they still with the company? Are they owning a huge amount of the company? And are they operating the company? If you have that trifecta, then that's sort of the formula that to me makes, these disruptive visionaries that build companies that last decades, that really are examples of hyperchange in their industry. And I think Jack Dorsey is a perfect example of that. He's the entrepreneur. He started Twitter. He's actually now back at CEO of Twitter and at CEO of Square. This is his second company. He's a software guy by nature. He's still super young. This is a jockey I want to bet on. I think Jack Dorsey has his best years ahead, and he's an incredible innovator in the payments and tech world. When you buy Square stock, you're betting on him and his baby, so I think that can't be understated. But now let's get into the fun part and go under the hood at Square's financials and talk about the different pieces of their business. The first thing you'll see, is rapid top-line growth. As you'd expect, the company has been losing money every single year. Although those losses have been getting smaller recently, Square does still lose money. But now if we take a look a little bit deeper at this revenue, what you'll notice is that revenue growth, was kind of a little bit slower from 2014 to 2017, and then really is sort of accelerated and taken on a new life of its own in 2018. And this is something that I think has gotten investors super excited that we can expect to continue. Now, to figure out what's going on, we got to take a look even deeper at the revenue breakdown of where Square is generating money from. Transactions are the bulk of Square's revenue. That's actually the payment processing that you do when you swipe your credit card. That's still Square's core business. But with that green layer there, that's from 2014 to 2016, that says Starbucks, that revenue is from a partnership with Starbucks that has obfuscated the growth and financials of Square for some time. So story time about why that happened and what went down. So Starbucks originally in 2012 invested about $25 million in Square and wanted them to build the technology and backbone of their mobile payments infrastructure and mobile app. And so this was a huge partnership for Square that generated a ton of money for Square throughout their time working with Starbucks, but that gross margin was actually at a loss. So they were generating hundreds of millions in revenue from Starbucks, but they were losing even more than that just to process the payments. And so it wasn't a good partnership. They decided to wind it down and go their separate ways. Square was, or or Howard Schultz, the CEO and founder of Starbucks, is actually on the board of Square for a year when they originally did this, but it didn't work out. As Square was about to IPO, they wound down this partnership, and that's sort of why growth looked a little bit slower in 2016 and 2015, because this partnership was winding down. And then at the same time, you also have that light blue line, software and subscription revenue for Square, which is accelerated and became a huge business out of nowhere for the company. And so that's the sort of trend of why growth is accelerating. And then you also have Bitcoin revenue that started to kick in this year. We're going to touch more on that in a second. If we go to a quarterly view, you can see how this is playing out even more. You can see the Starbucks revenue really carried into mid 2016. And then it stopped. And as it stopped, revenue kind of flatlined, but then started picking up and accelerating again as payments growth was strong and the software subscription revenue took off as well. And if we take a look at the revenue growth over time for Square, you can see that, as the Starbucks contract was dying down, they hit a low point of about 21% year over year growth. But then as that's faded and as they be, leaning more on this subscription business, the growth rate of Square as a whole has been accelerating dramatically, over 50% in Q3, and looks like it's poised to keep climbing. So Square is growth is actually accelerating even though they're getting bigger. This is a really interesting trend. And what's going on behind the scenes here, even one layer below, is not only is the amount of revenue expanding rapidly, but the profitability of that revenue is expanding rapidly as well. The company's gross profit, as they've getting more efficient at transacting payment volume, they don't have that low margin, crappy margin Starbucks revenue, and they have more very high margin software and subscription revenue. Gross margin has gone through the roof from 23% in 2013 to almost 40% in 2018 per my expectations. So when you add this up, rapidly growing, accelerating revenue growth, revenue growth is getting more profitable, your gross profit or your core engine for profitability is expanding like crazy. So this chart, I love to just display what Square is doing. And as you can see, growth has been accelerating, poised to hit 62% growth in Square's gross profit this year to almost 1.4 billion. And this is what I think has investors so excited. If we look at this on a quarterly basis, this really gives you a scope of just how rapidly the underlying profit engine for Square is accelerating. Just a year ago in Q3, they were doing 220 million in gross profit, now over 350 million in the same period this year. Now let's break down Square's revenue into the different sections and really dive deep into what's going on and what will happen for this business. So let's start with transaction-based revenue. This is really simple. When you swipe your card with Square, that is a transactional-based revenue. And as you can see, that's growing pretty nicely, consistently. This is the big bulk of Square's business. It was growing 28.4% in Q3. So I can expect this to get, my guess is this will continue to grow in the 20 to 30% range. As Square gets more people in their ecosystem, as those more people transact more payments, this is going to continue to scale. And the really interesting part about transactional revenue is this is the chart that sums it all up. So Square is charging vendors about 2.9% every time you swipe your card. They're only taking 1% of that. So Square's only getting about 33% of that revenue. And in the long term, I think Square's going to actually be able to drop what it's charging to vendors. As you can see, it's already happening from 2.93 to 2.91 and increase its own profit, which has actually gone up from 1.05 to 1.87 in Q3. Why is this going to happen? So little Moonshot Monday break here. Jack Dorsey, obviously the founder of Square, is also a huge Bitcoin bull. And why does this matter? You might be like, oh, Bitcoin, what does that have to do with anything? Well, eventually, my theory is Jack Dorsey and Square in particular are setting up to be the infrastructure to allow Bitcoin to be used to purchase a cup of coffee. Jack Dorsey has even said on the record he thinks Bitcoin will be the internet's digital currency and that Bitcoin will be used to buy cups of coffee one day. And now you might be saying like, oh, well, Bitcoin's too slow. It's too expensive. That'll never work. Psh, of course, that's not going to happen. Yes, on the main chain, Bitcoin's too slow and expensive, but I don't think Square's solution when you pay for that cup of coffee on Bitcoin will be settled on the main Bitcoin blockchain. Much like today's financial system for dollars has, a settlement layer for central banks and then all these different layers, Visa and MasterCard are third or fourth layer solutions. So you can't really compare them to Bitcoin's first layer main blockchain, but Bitcoin's second layer solutions are coming out and those will be able to handle much more transactions, much more rapidly, make buying a cup of coffee with Bitcoin a reality. And the biggest project that is the second layer solution of Bitcoin is something called the Lightning Network. And the Lightning Network is being driven by a company called Lightning Labs, or they're one of the main, contributors. And Lightning Labs is a startup that recently got a couple million in funding, and one of those backers was Jack Dorsey. So I believe Jack Dorsey is setting up for this move where he implements the Lightning Network as a payment mechanism on Square's platform. I mean, this is why Square is such a powerful company. They have all the vendors, they have all the consumers, they can use whatever is the most disruptive and best-in-class payment technology and just plug it into their ecosystem. And so I think that's what they're getting ready to do when this second layer, solution, Lightning Network of Bitcoin hits maturity and is working. And if it is, then Jack Dorsey probably can't wait to implement it in Square. And when they do, getting back to this chart, there's a potential for Square to, let's say increase their cut of payment margin from 1.07% to 1.5%, and then drop what vendors are paying from 2.9% to 2%. And so they can, charge vendors less, but also be making more if they're using something that's a lot more efficient, like Bitcoin on the Lightning Network. So that's just one little moonshot. But anyway, not to get too crazy about payments, but another thing that has me so excited here is Square's opportunity without crypto and payments is massive. There's 21 million small businesses to medium-sized businesses in the US. This is just in the US. That's a $3 trillion payment opportunity and a $26 billion adjusted revenue opportunity for Square. Today, Square's doing just $53 billion in payment volume in the US and $0.6 billion in adjusted revenue. So Square's opportunity is just 3% penetrated in the US for payments. So this business could get huge just on its own. And additionally, when you think about what's happening internationally, that is opportunity is potentially 6 to 7x what's in the US. So they've only penetrated 3% of the US. And then, so you get the point that there's huge potential to grow this transaction-based revenue for Square into the future, and that's the core business. Moving on to the next line item, Starbucks revenue. So this is, I left all the quarters on there till now so you could see when it really died down. Not too much to say here as they're not working with Starbucks anymore, but this was Starbucks' revenue impact and sort of what threw off the growth in Square's overall financials a couple years ago. Now, moving on to the exciting piece of the business, subscription. Software subscription-based revenue. This is the fastest growing, most exciting part of Square. This revenue was up 155% year over year in Q3 to 166 million. So the growth here is astronomical. The margins on this revenue are the highest in any of Square's businesses. So this is what has me personally so excited about the business. And I think this is going to be a multi-billion dollar a year revenue line item for Square in no time. Square fundamentally, so you have this payment network that's processing these transaction fees that Square, they are making a little bit of money on that, but then they start layering on top all these value-add solutions like payroll software, like Caviar, which is their app for food delivery. If you're a cafe or bakery that uses Square, you can just tie into their delivery network. They also have Square Capital, which is a program that loans you money. All of these extra higher margin value-add services are being layered into software and subscription revenue and are super successful and are all incredibly early in taking off. Square Capital, for instance, is this program that will leverage all of the data. They see exactly how much money you're making every day, how much revenue you have, whether you're making a very profitable business or not. And if you are, and they think you should expand, they can give you money to buy more inventory or to buy a new location. But the difference is, instead of having to go to a bank and ask for a loan and do all this paperwork, Square will just send you a push notification saying, hey, we love your business. We think you're doing awesome. Would you like to expand? Here's a loan. Here's all the terms. Just click yes. We're actually going to get paid back automatically through just taking a cut back of your transactions on Square over time. So it's way more frictionless to get capital for these small to medium-sized businesses, and Square is a much smarter lender than any bank would be because they have such granularity of data of every transaction that's happening at that store that they can loan with much more higher confidence. So that's just one tiny example of the way that Square is transforming small to medium-sized businesses and how that's just a business that's just in its infancy and being layered into this software and subscription piece of the business that I think is so exciting. Next piece of Square's revenue is hardware. So this is the more boring sort of like really legitimate hardware. This is what you swipe your credit card on. And Square actually doesn't really make money on this. They pretty much sell it at a break-even gross margin. But this is an important piece of the business in that this is always getting the vendors to upgrade to the Square's newest technology and product. It is growing over time, but the gross profit is still flat, actually a little negative on that. Now we have Bitcoin revenue. So this, I also left the timeline so you can see just how out of nowhere in Q1 2018, Bitcoin started making over 30 million a quarter for Square. The gross margin on this revenue is also about break even, so it's not a profit driver yet, but this does show you how forward thinking Square is. And so back to my moonshot, you maybe thought I was crazy talking about Bitcoin and Square, but they're already offering its consumers in its Cash App to be able to buy and sell Bitcoin. And Cash App is this another really interesting component of Square's business that isn't really generating much revenue for them other than Bitcoin, but it's not profitable. It's a Venmo competitor, and it's a way into consumer banking. And so the Cash App is rapidly rising in popularity. It allows you to send money to anybody instantly for free, just like Venmo. You can also buy Bitcoin with it. I've actually started personally using the Cash App more and more. So I think that's another really interesting piece of Square's business is you have on the the point of sale hardware on the business side, which is the center of where the payment takes place. Square's building this whole ecosystem for vendors and merchants and essentially becoming a bank for them in a lot of ways. And then on the consumer side, Square has the Cash App, which is becoming sort of a bank for consumers. Now let's talk about valuation. This is the part about Square that I'm a little bit iffy on, because I love the business. I love the disruption. I love the CEO. I think this is going to be a much bigger, more ingrained piece of our society in the next 5 to 10 years. And that's a trend I want to bet on. But the question is, what price am I paying for that? Is it a fair price, a fair value? And that's something that I'm having difficulty wrapping my head around. If we take a look at the numbers, 500 million shares times 60 a share, about a $30 billion market cap, divided by 3.4 billion in 2018 sales, 8.8 times price sales, 30 billion divided by negative 50 million in 2018 EBIT, negative 600 price EBIT. Just put that in there for fun. But let's talk about the price sales. So you're paying about 9 times price sales for a business that's growing 50% with about 40% gross margins. So it just seems, I don't know. I just think this is a really, really expensive multiple to pay for a business in the long run. I think it's going to be pretty low margin overall. And so, depends how much they transition to software, depends how much a bunch of other stuff. It just feels very, very pricey. And so I extrapolated this out for the next 3 years. These are total estimates, could be way, way off. But as you'll see, I have revenue scaling from 3.4 billion, growing 45%, then 40%, then 35% in 2021 to 9.1 billion in revenue, 460 million in profit. And so this is my rough estimates of Square evolving. I used a 1% operating margin in 2019, 3% in 2020, 5% in 2021. And if we plug this into the valuation, the same 30 billion valuation, you can see that Square now is looking like it'll trade, based on 2021 financials, a 3.3 times price sales estimate and 65 times price EBIT. So I'm paying 65 times 2021 earnings. Will they be growing faster than 65% in 2021? Maybe. So maybe that'll be justified. But 65 times earnings that are 3 years out is insanely expensive to me. And I don't know. And so that's the one reason of why I'm like a little bit hesitant of Square. The stock has skyrocketed since its IPO. It's down from like $100, which was totally insane. But I'm just worried that the valuation is a little too rich. But that being said, if I had money, I would buy Square stock today, like not take a full position, but start to buy a little bit, because I think, and this is a good lesson in business in general, like Square's market cap is 30 billion. Sure, I can try and crunch numbers and justify that valuation, but my type of investing is buy and hold, super long-term, bet on CEOs, bet on companies whose business models aren't mature yet. Like, we don't know what Square's going to look like at maturity, what its margins will be, how much it'll make from software, what its transaction margin profile will look like. Like, there's so much up in the air. You're really just betting on the jockey, the execution, and the opportunity. So when I think about the opportunity for Square, like I said, they're building this entire back end sort of banking infrastructure for small to medium sized businesses. Just that Square Capital thing I mentioned, the data advantage they have from all of their payment volume on merchants they can use to start lending to the right people is an incredible, like that alone, I think could justify the whole valuation of 30 billion in the long term. So that's just one piece of the way I look at it. And the other thing is, then you have all these things like payroll and all these other value add-on services that are also huge billion-dollar industries that they're disrupting as well. But then on the consumer side, you have the Cash App and sort of this new, you think about how Square can integrate crypto. They're really becoming a consumer-facing bank as well. And they're overall just an incredibly trusted brand by both vendors and consumers. This new age digital bank that's connecting them with this payments ecosystem. Like, I think the potential for Square is to be a multi-$100 billion financial services company that really brings payments and financing and money into the digital age. And so that's the vision for Square. That's what has me so excited. I think that's a company that's hundreds of billions of dollars. They have a young CEO who can get them there. They're showing all the right signs of generating a ton of traction in the market early with their products. They're innovating quickly. I just think Square has some sort of it factor that's hard for me to quantify that makes me think they're going to win. And if they win, I think they're attacking a multi-$100 billion opportunity. I think this company could get 10x bigger from here to being worth 300 billion, maybe more. And so that's why I like investing in it today. That's why I'm excited about it. Even though you don't see the profits yet, and you may not be even able to justify the revenue multiple yet, it's all coming. And those are all lagging indicators of the success of the business and the value it's generating for customers. And so I think Square is a super exciting company to watch in the future. If I could own one stock, it's not Tesla, it would be Square. Hopefully I have some money to buy some shares soon. Anyway, would love to know what you think in the comments below. Are you a fan of Square? Bull, bearish? What do you think of this episode, my analysis, my projections? Would love to get all sort of feedback on that. And huge shout out to all the people who went on Patreon and suggested Square. I hope you liked the episode. Anyway, this is HyperChange. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.